everyone. I'm Joanne Britton, and I'm very happy to welcome you to the 5th of our Fall Variety Pack today. But before we get started, I want to remind you, please turn off your cell phones and turn on your tea coils, if that applies to you. Today I'm very happy, on behalf of the committee, to welcome Bill Pollak to the podium. Bill taught at Grinnell College and at the University of Chicago. And this morning he's going to share with us automation, robotics, artificial intelligence. What jobs will be left for us? Bill.
Well, thank you and good morning. It's a kick to be here. 50 years ago, we left Grinnell. We came back about a year and a half ago, and what's so interesting to me is that I feel so comfortable here, seeing so many faces that we've come to know, and that makes me appreciate all the more how pleasant it is to be back here. So thank you for that. It really is appreciated. I thought and I hoped, and if everybody will be quiet, maybe you can hear, I had a choice of playing 12-second sections of music, 30 seconds, or 2-minute sections. But since we're supposed to be started, I'm just going to give you a little bit. But it's not working. Oh, there it is. End of musical interlude. Is this too loud or too soft? You have to tell. I can't tell how. So point your hands like this if you don't hear me, and like this if you have. Give me some sign that it's not working. I'm going to be jumping around quite a bit, and maybe speeding up sometimes and slowing down, because unlike other people who've done these in a more professional fashion, I do better if I sort of not wing it. I've got too much down here. But if I talk without looking too much at this, it turns out I may not do writing or talking well, but I do better at talking. So we'll see how it goes. Let me say, well, let me tell you, there is an outline, even if it's not apparent. First, I'm going to do some background stuff. It's going to have 2 parts. One is historical as an introduction. The other is conceptual because it relates to an important concept that is present when one thinks about technical change. And all those words, robotics and artificial intelligence, are tied up with the concept of productivity. So there's going to be a first section which does those 2 things. Then I'm going to do a bit of talk about things through time. I will not honor history very well. It will be very selective. It will pick up on things that I think contribute to our understanding of what's going on. And the third part is about what people think about what's going to be happening in the future. So those are the 3 parts. So let me get started. In addition to the musical interlude, let me give you some pictures. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be, so let's hope this works. That lets you see everything that's coming, and I could block that out, and I wouldn't know what was coming. That's not what we want. That you may recognize as a cover look. They were sold a lot in the 19th century, and thanks to Carol's family, we had one that was almost a twin for that. It's really pretty precisely woven. In fact, if you want to appreciate both the cover look and what people were interested in at the time in the ways of decoration, I show you a detail. So that was at the bottom, and evidently trains, which were a relatively new thing, were worthy of being on a bedspread or a coverlet. Now, why do I have these pictures here? I do have an ulterior motive. The coverlet, I have some more of it, and I'll skip those. Those were made on something called a jacquard, and if I'm mispronouncing it, raise your hand and tell me how to do it. They were made on a jacquard loom. And the jacquard loom was invented in 1804, and it made it possible for a worker to turn out many more coverlets than he or she could have done prior to the invention of this device. And if you'd like to see the device, we're going to get to some numbers soon. Well, I'll protect you from that for a while. Here's another picture. That's what a jacquard loom looked like, and I hope I don't botch it when I try to describe what the jacquard loom did. What it did was it picked up the warp threads in just the right part. They're the ones that go this way, and they picked them up so that when they threw, and they did it in different ways at different times, the shuttle through there, it went through in just the right pattern. And as the process went on, each row of the weft, or woof, I was taught as a child, because Rodgers and Hammerstein have that word in one of their songs. But it turns out, I've read recently, it's weft. And when it picked up the warp so that on each passage through, the right thing happened to make that design. Now, how did it work? It worked by being guided by cards that looked like that. And each passage of the shuttle corresponded to one line in the cards. So this was a pretty automated process for 1804. And jacquard, I think, did okay. If you wonder, I gotta keep watching the clock. That's when I speed up or slow down. Put this down. There's how many you really needed to make a coverlet. It didn't take just a few of those cards. It took a lot of cards. And by the way, those cards had to be made, so it saved the time of the weavers, and this is worth noting. It added some time for the people who had to punch the cards. They had the designs in their head, they had the design, actually that's the designs written down pretty carefully, and then they made the cards. Now, those were very nice coverlets, but look at this one. This isn't a coverlet. Change. That's a portrait of Mr. Jacquard. Now, why would I put up a portrait of Mr. Jacquard? The reason I put the portrait of Mr. Jacquard up, let me see, I've got numbers here. It took 24,000 cards to make that portrait of Mr. Jacquard. Now, some of you will know more about a lot of what I'm talking about than I do, and I'm not going to try to avoid looking at you. The person who owned this was named Babbage. And you've heard Babbage because he made a device called the Analytical engine. And the Analytical engine was a predecessor of the computer. And in fact, it had built into it, or rather, its design incorporated into it things that are central to how computers work today. It had central. There's a picture, and let me jump. I really don't know what I'm doing, so let me jump way ahead. because you've heard the term algorithm, and it gets thrown around all the time. And I thought I knew what it meant, and then I looked up Wikipedia, and I found out that different people have different understandings of it. But this is a classic algorithm, and it relates to Babbage. An algorithm basically is a set of steps, and at each step, the algorithm says go this way or that way, depending on what it's told. So in this case, it turns out you don't really have to know what this is about too much, but you put in two numbers, A and B. And at the first step, it says it's B is 0. If yes, go left. If no, go down. And at each step, something like that is in there. And that's what an algorithm is. What's changed, I'll talk about later. Algorithms are still around, and I don't know as much about them as a lot of people out here, so I'm going to stop. But they were, the analytic engine had algorithms built into it. Actually, the analytical engine was the third of several devices that Babbage designed. He never made any of them. He didn't make them because as I understand, the disagreements between him and the fellow who was going to make them, and because of funds. But the central thing here is that the analytic engine had into it what central things in computing, including what's going on there. That's branching that was conditional on what happened before, and something called a loop, which I won't get into, but it basically, if you know anything about computing, it says, oh, go around and do it again, go around and do it again. And those were in there. Now, another picture. Her name was Ada. At some point, I'm just going to get more of that. The spirit of this, the method that I'm involved in will change. But anyway, that's Ada Lovelace. She was an assistant to Babbage, and she also was the only legitimate daughter of Lord Byron. And she was very important to Babbage, and I'll read it you. Some of the mathematicians here will know the person I'm quoting here. Stephen Wolfram argues that there's nothing so sophisticated or as clean as Ada's computation of the Bernoulli numbers. And then he goes on to say that she had a much more clear exposition of the abstract operation of the machine than did Babbage. And the other thing is for Babbage, it was a machine for cranking out numerical answers, but she thought of it as something that had the potential to do more. And interesting that, here I go, sidetrack. You'll notice that we call these things you use every day and you type one and you go to the internet a computer. And that's because, until fairly recently, what they were used for was what Babbage had in mind for them, which was computing. And she, a long time ago, thought you might be able to use it for more. So as we jump away, another picture. This will make some of the audience very happy, because they will remember that, they did their research using cards that were very much like, but you can tell. This is how you enter data in a computer up to the 60s. And they're called Hollerith cards, and if I have run out of time later, I can talk more about them. Important things to remember here are that, in a sense, Jacquard's loom was run by a program, so it was like today's machinery. They run on programs. Second, and this is a crucial distinction, the process that was scriptable. Although it might take thousands of cards, you could write the script. It wasn't what a lot of you do a lot of the time, which is not very scriptable. And that's an important distinction. Let me just get, you can look at my face and hear my voice and you can tell if I'm nervous or happy. Very hard to write the script that will do that. No, that's a pretty important point. All right, so it was scriptable, and it's ambiguous about its, well, not very. I think it disemployed more than it employed, but it didn't disemploy everybody, because the people who operated the machine, the people who designed the machine, the people who built the machine, and so forth. You can fill in the blanks. All right. Slow down, take a deep breath. It's going to change a little. You're going to see a lot of, you're not going to see a lot of numbers. You're going to see a lot of tables, steep, flat, you name it. Don't think you have to remember any number I say or any graph particularly. It's the sense of what's going on that's important, and I'll try to bring that out. What I'm going to talk about is the concept of productivity, and I better start talking potential because I'm going to slow. Productivity has different forms. We'll use the one that's most useful here, which is how much output is produced by a person per hour. And I will talk about that a bit. So got it? How much a person, and it's not how many items, but the value, the way we'll talk about it, is how much value is produced by each hour of work. Now, it's a pretty central concept in economics. In the very long term, it has risen a lot for people, and I just ran into a quote that I thought was pretty neat. From the first rock tools used by humanoids 3 million years ago to the earliest cities 10,000 years ago, all the way through the Middle Ages to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution around 1800, just before Mr. Jacquard, living standards doubled. Over all those millions of years, living standards only grew a little bit. Another doubling took place over the subsequent period to 1870. Then, according to the standard calculation, the world took off. The world economy took off. What explains that? Short course and very short course. This one's capitalist institutions. Doesn't mean I think everything about capitalism is good, but it did cause people to invest in capital to add to the physical plant that was around, and that contributes to productivity, just like Mr. Jacquard's device did. Just as important, something that was embodied in Jacquard's loom, which is what we know, technology. And that's important. Technology just doesn't just mean what people talk about now. It's anything we know that enable us to get more out of the resources we got. So that's another thing that causes productivity to go up. Another, I've already said this in a way, is additions to the capital stock we've got. And then terribly important, and we'll get to this later, are additions to human capital. Not just what is known, but what the people who are working know. And that's human capital. And there's a lot of it out here. So, isn't there a threat? Of course, it's implicit in the title of this talk. Isn't there a threat that if productivity rises, my computer's just gotten dark, that if our productivity rises, there won't be enough work to go around. A moment ago, I tried to raise the worry that if weavers got too productive, weavers would be thrown out of work. Isn't it just as worrisome that if productivity generally goes up, we'll be thrown out of work? Let me give you some numbers. Sorry about that. Between 1946 and 1946 and 2017, what it took 100 folks to produce in 46 could be produced by only 25 in 2017. So if you're worried about people being out of work, shouldn't the fact that it took only 25 people to produce as much as 100 used to mean that we had 75% of the population out of work? Well, happily, we can be bailed out. If that were true, and I were to draw up here, which I won't, a graph of unemployment from your side, it would look like this, with unemployment getting worse every year, every decade. Here, this one goes up and down. What you should look at the endpoints. There's unemployment. It goes up and down. That's worrisome. That, you know, the down ones are bad. The up ones can be bad. I don't want to get into all of that. But if you tried to fit a line through there, it would be pretty close to flat. Unemployment has not gone skyrocketing. We don't have We only, right now, I don't know, somebody may have listened to the radio more carefully, but it's below 4.9% at the moment. I don't know what it is exactly. But unemployment has not been a scourge through time. Let me show something else, which shows, I just said something about it, you know, people could produce 4 times as much in an hour at the end as they could at the beginning. Here's a graph of how productivity grew over time. And the numbers actually, I'd take a minute or two to explain, but you can see that the one on the right and the one on, they bear the right relationship to one another. The one on the right is a little over 4 times as big as the one on the left, which means people at the end of that period in 2016 produced about 4 times as much as people did in 1946. And do we get anything out of it? Well, if you think it's good to have economic growth, and we can have a long discussion of that at some time, but right now we'll say it's not a bad thing. That's what GDP per capita, how much output there was per person, not for each person, per person on average in the economy. You see it went up an awful lot. Why did it go up? Because productivity went up and unemployment did not. It's that simple. Okay. Wow. I'm going to talk fast through something. Just to give you insight into something, get some payoff to this productivity notion. What we've got here is how many Haydn quartets could be produced by a quartet per hour, and it says in the 1970, 2 per hour, and 2010 they didn't play the quartets any faster. It's still only 2 quartets. But in knit socks, let's assume productivity was improved by some invention, 6 times as many. Why do I do that? Because we'll get some insight about something, and I hope I can do this fast. On the right, I plugged wages in, and I said, look, we all know wages go up. Suppose wages went up from $10.70 to $80 in 2010. What would happen to the price of these goods? Well, what you see is they both got more expensive. Well, they both got more expensive, but one's price only went up by a little bit, the socks. Why? Because productivity rose there. Why didn't the price of going to hearing the quartet go up? Because productivity, it didn't. Excuse me, the price of the quartet went up much more because, thank you, everybody looks shocked. Productivity didn't rise in the case of the quartet. So what you get here is, in areas where productivity rises fast, those prices won't rise so much. In areas where productivity rises slowly or doesn't rise, those prices are going to go up by a lot. And I think I handed out a table, and you've got it, and I don't. But it's interesting. Overall, between the 2 years, what I did here was, I got a lot of numbers. The column on the right says 2016 prices. How much higher were they than 1969 prices? On average, prices rose by a factor of 5.2. On average, in 2016, prices were 5 times as high as in 2016. Just so you don't worry too much about it, wages also were going up, so it doesn't mean things were getting worse. What I wanted to focus on here is the significance of productivity, differential rates of productivity growth. And what you see, and some people are seeing this already, the goods on the whole, their prices rose by a factor of 3, whereas services, their prices rose by a factor of 7. That's because, in a rough sense, we think that in many cases, it's easier to increase productivity in the making of goods than it is into the making of services. That's a generalization. It doesn't hold up always. You can look at it, but there are a few shockers in there. Who in here is not a hell of a lot more productive, I don't think this is quite right, than he was 50 years ago? It's me. And what do we see about what's happened to the price of higher education? There it is. Its price has risen by 24. And it's gone up for a bunch of reasons, but as fundamental as any is this: productivity in the making of education hasn't increased anywhere near as much as it has in producing, where is it? Oh, there's one that's really small. Ah, yes. 0.1. The prices have gone down. You can play with the table and don't read too much. Don't have to explain all of it. That's complicated. But the general point is clear. And it may, if I ever get to the end of this, it may help us understand what's going to happen in the future. Get some insight, not understand. Okay. So we had a theory and we had empirical results. And the empirical results fit the theory, which isn't always true. Then we have a problem. One's got to give. All right, here we go through history. It's pretty fast. 19th century. That's the one that began with Mr. Jacquard. You probably all know what a Luddite is, right? Someone who's against machines. There were riots. And the idol was thought the riots were really about the coming of machines. And it turns out, at least according to the historians who were summarized by the historians, whose summaries of the historians I read, which tells you the depth of my learning, it really was not a general protest against machines. It was the fact that these machines employed lower wage people than previously had been engaged in those tasks. And as a consequence of their coming in, wages went down. That's what was being protested. It was the decline of wages, and it's important to point out something here. That what was, and it has to do, it has to do with the fact that in the 19th century, and I read a fair amount about this, the belief is that the innovations were biased in favor of low-skilled people. That is, they put to work and increased the demand for low-skilled people relative to those who are unskilled. If you want a picture of this, I have the best one that we're most familiar with, creep into the 20th century. If you think of who was making automobiles before Ford came along, it was skilled artisans who knew how to braze, who knew how to weld, they were blacksmiths who could do new things. Those were skilled people. Who worked in the Ford plant? They weren't skilled, they weren't terribly skilled people. There were people who could be trained pretty quickly to operate the machines that Ford had put in place. It'll go back on. High tech, it didn't want fingerprint. I hope. Yeah, there we go. So now we're taking care of the industrial evolution in 1 or 2 sentences at most. First place with honors to Mr. Dickens. There were terrible times for many people. There were times of social upheaval, but on the whole, it is believed, but there's certainly arguing about this, that at the end of it, in general, people were better off in material terms. In terms of the work they had to do, and in terms of the goods and services that they had access to. But the important thing to remember here, particularly in the current context, is there seems to be general agreement that technical changes were biased in favor of the unskilled. All right, that takes care of the 1900s. 1900 to 1960. I want to talk about two things, and I'm really going to operate with quotes because I can't improve on the wording of the person who's given this about as much attention as anybody. It's a woman named Claudia Golden who has written a great deal about technology and people at different times coming up to the present. But what we're talking about now in our quick move through history is from 1900 to 1960. And in my notes it says here, I'm supposed to say, there was more than a bit going on. The breakup of the trusts, World War I, the Depression, World War II, and a strong recovery from that. So that takes care of it, except for what Ms. Golden tells us, which has strong bearing on what we're about today. She talks about two things in the quotes I've got. Changes in the economy, on the one hand, and importantly, changes in what we as a nation, and it's not down here, but in her writings, a lot has to do with why is it that over the period I was just talking about, we grew so much more than the rest of the world. And she has comparisons with Germany and France and England and other industrial countries. And at the beginning, they were all focused on, I mean, they were consciously focused. You know, there were these world fairs where you trotted out your latest stuff and compared them. And there was a lot of concern about what could be done. This is, you know, towards the period referred to as Industrial Revolution. People were very focused on what one could do to enhance, guess what, productivity. So I'm going to read you what she says about the economy in the United States, and we're talking 1900 to 1960. The changes that created the new economy were pervasive. Some emanated from basic findings as diverse as the germ theory of disease and the development of high-grade steel. They led to an increased specialization of academic disciplines and a greater use of science by industry. Certain industries became infused with science, including petroleum refining, wood distillation, sugar refining, rubber, canning, paper and pulp, photography, fertilizers, and later steel, ceramics and glass, paints and varnishes, soaps and vegetable oils. The internal combustion engine, electrification, and use of small motors were also major contributors to the new economy. That is, changes to how we went about producing things in factories and in other production places. Then she makes what's a crucial point for it. These changes did more than increase the demand for a small cadre of scientists and engineers. They changed the demand for skills among the mass of workers. The rise of big business and the growth of large-scale retailing increased the demand for secretaries, bookkeepers, typists, stenographers, and retail sales clerks, positions that generally required a high school degree or some years of secondary school. The growth of office machinery, such as the comptometer, you can remember some of these typewriters, remember those, dictating machines, addressographs, and mimeograph around 1910 produced the first information revolution. Sorry about the pictorial introduction. There we go. I'm sorry for interrupting myself because I think it's pretty strong writing. All of these developments around 1910 produced the first information revolution in the office and further shifted out the demand for clerical workers. So what was needed to keep the machinery of the economy going were new skills. I mean, and she goes into much greater depth than I can go into here. And I quoted her because I couldn't, my freewheeling style couldn't do what she does. And she says at the same time, there was a broad, which I wasn't aware of, a broad-based movement to expand education beyond the elementary level, attributable both to political developments and to a growing recognition that there was a need for greater training. So the economy is growing, and evidently we needed people with different skills. Continuing to quote from her, but I'll read fast so we can make the 40-minute break time. Clear across America in the early 20th century, citizens at the local community level discussed and debated the necessity for a modern form of secondary education. The new schools would train American youth for life rather than for college, and they would enable a child in Nebraska to enter the same office job as a child in New York State. These discussions were part of a widespread grassroots movement sparked by individuals and by local associations. I don't think I have it down here. She talks about the high school movement. Secondary school enrollment increased rapidly in the U.S. after 1910. Much of the increase was due to the building of high schools where none previously existed. Existing schools became larger, more schools were built in large cities. High schools in the 1910s, even small ones, endowed youth with skills and knowledge for the new economy. Algebra, geometry, and bookkeeping were offered at most high schools in Iowa in 1914. Iowa comes up later here, too. And by the time of World War II, the median American 18-year-old was a high school graduate, and except in the South, more than 60% had graduated from high school. There's a nice, oh, don't tell me I'm missing. Iowa. Interestingly, she, like all economists, wants quantitative stuff, not enough to do descriptive. So, yeah. What do these numbers mean? I think what you want to look at is what the payoff was going to, what was the payoff for somebody in going to high school? And the reason I was here is that was the state that produced census data that was good enough to be the foundation for what she did. And what you see is that both in the, so I'll read the percentages, I'll read these as percentages. For every year of high school you got, where's my there, your expected income went up by 11%. That's if you are not in the farm. Surprise, folks, went up by 13% on the farm. There was the economy needed trained people. Public sector responded by producing more education, and it paid off both at the individual level, which these numbers mean, but taken as a whole, if each individual was paid more, they wouldn't be paid more unless they could produce more. It means that we got much more production out of them. And I think I'm supposed to stop.
And what is a common school?
Somebody,
What's common?
the question, and the reason I'm going to repeat it is partly because a big question is raised. But the other is that there may be somebody more familiar with education in the early part of the 20th century. The question was, what is a common school? I think I know. It's not going to be the only mystery at the end of my lecture. So you have a few minutes.
I forgot to do something. You saw on your seats the in the evaluation forms. I just wanted to point out to you, I know that you are very familiar with them, but they are not just for the variety pack this fall. If you have any suggestions about anything that pertains to the bucket classes, we are anxious to hear your ideas. So go ahead and fill them out and put them on the table on your way out. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Bill.
Well, you get it. Let me say why I put that on up front, and I didn't let you hear it. People worry about machines, computers taking over our jobs. Those musical selections were composed by a computer. The computer was told to play something that sounded a little like Beethoven. I think the second one's supposed to sound in the style of Chopin. The third is in the style of Scott Joplin. But it was done by a computer, programmed by a fellow who teaches at the University of California, Santa Cruz. But that gives you some idea of some people's expectations of how machines will substitute for us. So, some more on, this really belongs in the last part. I was talking about Claudia Golden and her writings about what was going on both with the economy and with education. That is, I see it as our response to changing technology and what it required. The other thing I'm going to talk pretty quickly about was written by Keynes. And you all know Keynes' name. He was a terribly important economist in the way a lot of people, including Mr. Krugman at the Times, think that his insights about the economy remain quite true. And basically, this is oversimplifying, because there's an economist who'll come after me with a sword, but that if there's unemployment, then do things which will increase the demand for output, and that will soak up the unemployment. That's gross oversimplification, and there are objections to doing it and so forth. But what's important in reading about Keynes is probably, I think, by most people's estimation, maybe not everybody, he's among the very most important economists of the 20th century. Now, there's the term technological unemployment. That's what the heading on this lecture's about. And where was that term first used? It was used by Keynes in an essay he wrote in 1930, right after the Depression crash. He wrote, and he's quoted this is quoted all over the place if you do reading of the kind I've been doing. We are being afflicted with a new disease of which some readers may not yet have heard the name, but of which they will hear a great deal in the years to come, namely technological unemployment. The quote is often interpreted to mean that, what was happening in the Depression would continue, we'd have technological unemployment forever. That isn't at all what he was writing about. He was pretty confident, too confident as it turned out, that we would pull out of the Depression. That's a long story. But he wasn't writing about that. He was confident we would pull out. His concerns were different. He thought because of technological progress and additions to physical capital in the not too distant future, we would produce as much or more than what people want. He wasn't worried that that was going to put a lot of people out of work because he thought we'd have the wisdom to have work as widely shared as possible. I think there's a quote, 3-hour shifts or a 15-hour work would take care of that. What interested him, and what concerned him, so here's what he was worried. He was worried that we'd be able to produce so much it wouldn't be able to keep all of us busy, but he was worried about what we do with our time. And this is going to be a mixture of Keynes and Pollak, where it's well-worded, people tell who it is. For innumerable centuries, man has had to work to survive and then meet higher needs. Work has been a most rewarding part of our lives. Would we be able to find meaning in our lives where significant work was no longer prominent? That's a botched Keynes. When because of wealth we are deprived we can't find alternatives as amusing, as meaningful to us as work. For the first time, man will be faced with his permanent problem. How to use his freedom for pressing economic cares. How to occupy the leisure which science and compound interest will won for him. To live wisely and agreeably and well. So this is what he was worried about in a a piece which is always cited for his worrying about technological unemployment. And he says, then he goes on, I'm skipping around, but he has strong feelings about some things. We shall be able to rid ourselves of many of the pseudo-moral principles which have hag-ridden us for 200 years, by which we have exalted some of the most distasteful of human qualities into the position of the highest value, virtues. The love of money as a possession, recognized for what it is somewhat disgusting morbidity, one of those semi-criminal, semi-pathological propensities which one hands over with a shudder to the specialists in mental disease. I found that pretty interesting. He was off in his forecast, though. And let me find a graph that fits this, if I can. These are very tiny. It's very large. There are two, I mean, some of these tables I feel very pleased with because I pulled them off myself. This one, this one surprises me. This happens to be limited to manufacturing, not all of employment, because I couldn't find numbers. But it shows how many hours per week. Well, you can see where they're way down. That's called a depression. This one's a depression of 37, 38, which people forget, which was terrible. But the important thing that struck me, and this is how wrong Keynes was, that for out to about 1930, well, stop, mid-20s, people took advantage of their growing wealth and income by working fewer hours. In other words, we could produce more, so what do you want to do with it? You can get stuff, get services, you can get goodies, or you can buy leisure. What did people do? They took more and more leisure until we got to here, and then if you look at it, incidentally, it's not quite the same in Europe. They have lessened their total work per year through time. When we haven't, we seem more, if you want to use a negative term, addicted, more inclined to take our benefits in other forms than leisure. And that's just to say, Keynes sure was wrong. We keep getting richer, but we keep working just as much. All right, 1960 to today. Let me briefly a list of things where employment has fallen. Bookkeepers, telephone operators, secretaries, travel agents, manufacturing workers, longshoremen. 1960 today, the most under-recognized technical change we've got has been container ships, and they've had an influence in everything, and I'd like to talk more about them because I know something about it. But that incredible change, it explains a lot of the increase in international trade, which we may think is due to something else, but a lot of it is due to the reduction in cost of moving stuff. Okay, what produced this increase in okay, this goes back to something I was talking about at the very beginning, which is what explains economic growth. There's the number I talked about at the beginning when I was throwing numbers around. Average labor productivity, I'm looking 59 to 73, so 60 to the present roughly. So 2.8% per year is how much productivity rose by. Where did it come from? Some of it had to do with having more and more capital equipment, financed by capital, used in the other way. And some of it came from information technology, think computers, some of it came from non-information technology. Some of it came from, and I was just here trying to put numbers on something I talked about, numbers without numbers earlier, labor quality, or what I was calling human capital accounted for 0.28% a year, and multi-factor productivity, which is this table's way of talking about it, tries to capture a technical change. So those are the things which added up led to average labor productivity of 2.82% per year. So all of the things I talked about, indeed, at least according to this analysis, showed up. And how did it show up and how well we did? Important point, I have this not only for how well we did, but how different of us did differently well. Between 47 and 70, the bottom fifth went up by 3% a year, the middle fifth went up by 2.8% a year, and the top percent, oh, the poor top percent, they only went up by 1.4%. Between 70 and 2, now, I said I was talking about 60 to the present, so I can keep going. Between 70 and 2000, the picture changed. Look who got most of the gain. They went up by 4.5% a year. Middle fifth went up by a little under 2%, and the bottom fifth only by 1.4%. If you were worried about the bottom fifth, look at the bottom line. And you've read about that in the newspaper and elsewhere, but I thought it was nice to see a table that showed that on the whole, we did do better, but how that was distributed was different. Just in the 19th century, the benefits went to the low skill, which corresponds fairly well to lower income. Here, it's a change pattern.
That's right.
Now, in the period that I'm talking about, from 60 to, wow, okay, people were very worried, as they are today. I'll read Time magazine instead of more scholarly things. Number of jobs lost more efficient machines is only part of the problem. What worries job experts is that automation, is written in 1960, that automation may prevent the economy from creating enough new jobs. I'm sorry, I'm very bad at arithmetic. This is supposed to end at 11:30. Okay. Shorthand. Time magazine has a scare story very similar to those you read today about how all the jobs are going to disappear, and you don't have to hear Time magazine's version. What do? We set up a commission. And this commission, you'll be impressed by it, was the national, we, in this instance, was the Congress, set up the National Commission on Technology, Automation, and Economic Progress. You can imagine one with the identical title being set up today. Prominent people were on this commission. Does anybody know who I'm going to mention? No. You're all going to be pleased. On this group were Daniel Bell, sociologist, Edwin Land, who was important in Polaroid Land and the life of somebody in here, and Walter Reuther, who you remember from labor things, Thomas Watson, president of IBM, and Robert Solow, who's a great, I used a Nobel Prize winning economist, who wrote about economic growth. But the chair of this commission was Howard Bowen. Oh, good. I'm going to go fast here. It was a very thoughtful piece, I thought, and says that people worry, the world, at least the United States, people worry is on the verge of a glut of productivity sufficient to make our economic institutions and the notion of ample employment obsolete. They don't think that. We dissent from that view. We also dissent from the other extreme view of complacency. We got to do something. This was a time when we felt the government could do things. People can do more justice to that than I can. Technological change and increasing productivity, they reported, could cause unemployment, but the experience of the economy during the life of this commission is the best evidence that economic growth can continue to offset the growth of productivity of the labor force. and reduce unemployment further. Like all of these commissions, they come up with tables, like the ones you've been seeing, maybe ad nauseum. Let me show you their table. They tried to project, I've lost my pointer. What would happen, I just made a couple of the lines prominent so you didn't have to look at all of them. They thought that white-collar workers, there would be a lot of increase, 38% over the 10-year period they were looking at. They thought blue-collar workers, oh, not so good, only 17%. Well, if the number who were getting jobs fell, then that probably had implications, I'm talking off the top of my head, for the wages they were likely to see. If demand for them was falling, that's not so good. You don't have this one to take home. If you want it, send me an email, I'll send you the table. But also, sign of the times, well, what did they propose? Most important, I mean, they didn't make this the most prominent, but certainly was in their minds, that we would have sensible macroeconomic policies. We would have policies that would address, at the overall level, the employment problem. But then they went on to talk about specific policies that were concerning them. This is about the time when the Office for Economic Opportunity was getting started. So it was a very different time than today. But this is just a scattershot. They thought that for those less able to compete, productive employment opportunities should be publicly provided, neighborhood youth corps and other kinds of initiatives like that, particularly when we have so many unmet public needs. We should have public employment to meet those needs. They thought that for those who cannot find remunerative work, we should have income maintenance. And that'll be it. And they worried quite a bit about education and its importance. They focused a lot on the disadvantage of African Americans because, I mean, it's important to recognize, I guess they said, well, let me point out something about macroeconomics and African Americans. When, on the whole, I haven't looked at this in the last 5 years, but on the whole, when you look at the unemployment, I'm saying this because I heard somebody on the radio talking about this. People say there's low unemployment, and this guy was saying, listen, talk about low unemployment generally, but there's not so low unemployment for some groups, and African Americans are prominent among them. On average, not on average, almost always, the African American unemployment rate runs at about twice the rest of the population. They were quite modest in their forecast. They said we can't really forecast; it's too difficult. What we should do is be ready to act depending on what evolves. I'll to express their mind. Put that one. Our study of the evidence has impressed us with the inadequacy of the basis for any sweeping pronouncements about the speed of scientific and technological progress. Enough already. I'm supposed to be telling you what's going to happen in the future. First thing, everybody thinks this is time of unbelievable change. We've never had anything like this before, so let me rattle off some things from the past. Consider the significance of steamboats and trains in the 19th century and what they did to America. Consider for our grandparents what running water and indoor plumbing did for most of the nation. Consider what having electricity substitute for lamps, candles, kerosene and oil lamps, the trend, and what an advance that is. Think of how life expectancy rose between 1900 and 1950. It rose much more rapidly in spite of everything that we think about medicine's progress. I don't mean to deny that. It rose, life expectancy rose much faster in the first half of the century than in the second half. And then there's the little matter of the invention of birth control and the decline of women, of unwanted pregnancies. That's a sort of current topic. It's just trying to say, hey, we've had big change before, and they've made a lot of difference to our lives. They were hugely different. If you think of the revolution that our grandparents lived through, it's, I think, bigger than Twitter and Facebook. At this point, I thought of having videos of the wonders of the new world, and I'll throw out some words that get thrown around all the time. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, big data. You've heard those all. Now let me give you some examples of the miracles that are competing with the miracle of indoor running plumbing. I wanted to say, I did have a section where I tried to explain what each of those meant, and I'm going to skip that. But I did they're more important than trying to attach definitions to these terms is to recognize that in practice they extend the range of what can be done with other than human labor. The type of work that can be done, writing and composition, whatever you may have thought of it, the volume of work and the speed with which work can be done. That summarizes what those things are, not perfectly by a long shot. The examples I have videos on, but I didn't put them on here. It's too much trouble. A robot laying bricks. Amazon's automated warehouses, which you may have seen, with these big machines moving around. And at Amazon, you don't have to worry where things are put. They can be put randomly. You think they're a mess, but each one is tagged with, a barcode, and the machine knows where to go to pick it up, and so forth. They're amazing. Those are the ones self-driving trucks. We read a lot about that in cars. Those are all things that are easy to make videos of, but other things that, according to the people who write about these things, may be computerized or legal work. The work of a paralegal can be taken over by a computer that can scan much more than a score of people could. Cognitive front is Siri or whatever her competitors are that can do the amazing thing of understanding language if it's spoken in precisely the way that Siri expects. But that's quite a intellectual, that's quite a cognitive thing. So I'm shifting from the mechanical to the cognitive. Medical diagnostics, where given enough data, big data, and other stuff, cancers can be spotted by machines pretty well. It turns out they can do even better if there's a person there working with it. The person does better, the best person does better than the computer, but the computer and the person does better than either of them alone. Child welfare, I'll try to be a friend who in the colleague, because I didn't teach the stuff you're hearing about, a colleague wrote about a very important decision in the lives of kids who are in problematic homes. How does a decision to remove a child from the care of its parents, how should that be made? And this friend was trying to develop through something at the time called expert systems. Now, meaning that he interviewed a lot of people to find out what the experts thought under thus and so circumstance, and then the computer was supposed to come up with what would be done. Now that would be done by a machine that goes through hundreds of, as many records as they are about child welfare, and goes through them and tries to distill from them a good decision making. It has both what was done and what the outcome was, and then tries to distill. So these are all cognitive things that may be taken over, or people think that may be taken over by machines. What's driven all of this? What's made this possible are incredible, wonderful numbers on just how the cost of several things. The cost of a computer calculation, it's just fallen incredibly fast, by the billionfold. That has to do with the cost of computation. The speed of computation has risen in comparable, stupendous amounts. And the cost of storage has declined incredibly. So that when you hear about all of these things, artificial intelligence and big data and all of that, they're all the product of these really the technical, what do I want to say, not at the cognitive level, they're about changes in the machinery we've got. I'm sorry, the wonderful numbers, but some notions, things that you ought to think about when you're thinking about, can we, can this be computerized? Can this task be computerized? There are tasks which are routine, meaning that you could describe how they're done, and there are tasks that are non-routine. And it's interesting, I've got a chart in front of here. Non-routine cognitive tasks include medical diagnosis, legal writing, and so forth. In those instances, there probably are complementarities between the machine and the person, just as in the medical diagnosis case that I just talked about. That is, it doesn't, the human's not out of the picture, but he or she's got a complement which will enable them to be more productive. In the case of routine tasks, those where you can specify the steps that you go through, those are like your cards. You can sort of lay out what the steps are, and those are at great risk of being computerized. In the manual task, it's similar. Picking or sorting things is easily computerized. Repetitive assembly, putting together even something as small as a watch. Whereas, and I have some pictures here, but I don't have time for them, of Jack Morrison, who's known to many of you, or the folks who come around and fix things in our apartments, or if you don't live in the Mayflower, which many of you don't, who fix things in your apartments. Those are very hard to imagine being computerized or made. Interestingly enough, this table, which I'm looking at, is a crib sheet. They have one as non-routine truck driving, whereas in the time since this was written, it seems to be, although it's non-routine, the computer seems to be becoming able to do it. How do we think about what happens in the future? I'm going to talk about 3 approaches, and then I'm going to talk about my response, and we may or may not get to see the pictures. One is to just take examples. For example, when the ATM came along, everybody thought bank tellers would be out of business. Well, it turns out that most of the bank tellers are still employed. The banks found other things for them to do. So the point is that sometimes you think something terrible is going to happen, and there's an adaptation to it, which results. Another example that, part of that, let me go back because I didn't do that justice. What happened was the cost of opening a branch fell terrifically. So banks, over the period, may remember the number of branches expanded terrifically. So that kept a fair number of the bank tellers at work. This is the example approach to the problem as opposed to the more systematic one I'm going to get to. Barcode scanners, which everybody thought would put cashiers out of work. In fact, cashiers evidently are still needed. Their employment grew at an average rate of more than 2% between 1980, when we first saw them, and today. Another approach, okay, let me finally get some of the things. There's something, and it shows how many years will it be till jobs are fully automated. And so surgeons, you can look at them, don't have time to go through it, but anyway, a lot of people's jobs are at risk between now and 50 years from now. Retail salespeople, they're really, really at risk. And here are ones that, on the whole, are at much greater risk than I did these in the wrong order. It should have been this, and then I said, but even the ones you just saw. So even surgeons are at risk. But according to this, now where did this data come from? There's another approach to studying the problem. It came from a survey of people in computer research and neuroscience. So make it the way you will. Another approach is to, I'm going to show two things, and then I'm going to talk about what I think. Another approach is to take data which the Department of Labor has assembled on tasks and then apply to them thinking about how computerizable those tasks are. And there are two studies that are the most cited studies, you bump into them all the time, were done using this. One had all of this information on all of these tasks, and they combined that with data they had on different occupations. So they knew what a task different occupations did, they knew how computerizable the tasks were, and they came up with their estimates, which gives you another pretty graph. And what this says, this is the most difficult table to look at I've ever seen, actually. But if you think that what they're trying to say, the ones at the right are the risk is very high that they'll become 47% of them are likely to be lose their employment because of automation, and at the left end are those who are less at risk. The educational teachers here should feel good. It's got a nice big thing, low risk, but still they're at risk. This was by combining this information on tasks with information on occupations. Another group at the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development said, hey, I don't like that. I like all of the stuff on how computerizable the tasks are, but I don't like the way that you went about it, because you should have looked at jobs. Jobs are much more differentiated. You have to look at a finer scale than something as broad as occupations. And when they did it, they came up with whereas this group ended up saying, 40 to 50% in a few years. The OECD people, you're safe from a graph, they said the risk of job, so if you look at all of this data on how computerizable tasks are, found out what tasks were involved in different jobs, ran all of that through a computer, what you would conclude is the risk of job loss because of computerization was there for under 10%. Different thing, how many jobs would be changed by computerization? They said 70%. So the reason if I didn't talk so slowly at the beginning, I would have been able to give you more detail at the end. But there is far from complete agreement. Those who think that computers will take over less have in mind a point that some of you may be familiar with. It's easiest to develop computerization of those things that are hard for us to do, those things that we have to be taught. The hardest things to get computers to do are those things that come naturally to us. And I used an example earlier, reading facial expressions, knowing people's emotions, being creative, coming up with a new idea. All of those things are very hard to program a computer with. And I'll leave you with that, because when you think, you can think about things that come to us naturally, learning language. That's very hard for a computer. Siri can understand you if you talk one way, but Siri can't understand emotion in your voice worth a damn. Wouldn't even try. So I end up thinking that when you look at all of this research, you have to be fairly guarded in what you forecast. And I think what is important, you all have a wonderful table. Pull it out and look at it. I don't have it. It's my favorite table of all of these. What it says is, I'm going to talk, I'll send you this by email. on the table. Look at it. It says that in 1910, 31%, you all know this, 31% of the population was on farms. Now, this says 3%, it's now down to a little over 2%. Oh my Lord, how are we going to keep people employed if all those people move off the farm? Well, look at the green places and see where they've ended up. You can do that after you're done. What I want to not quite leave you with is this. Who in 1910 could have forecast what areas would grow? Who could have forecast that? And I'll leave it to you. The most important thing I take from this is our biggest risk. Now I'm talking like something on TV. Our biggest risks arise if we have ideological blinders on, if we, for example, thinking the government should not do certain things. Ideological blinders that keep us from, well, this wouldn't be ideological blinders. I think as important as anything is doing what Claudia Golden wrote about us in the early part of the 20th century, that we think deeply about how important getting education out there is and how important it is to distribute it in a way that gets it to the people who today aren't educated, don't get very good education. If they're bad off now, they're going to be worse off. They're going to be worse off because their job may be taken by a machine or because they don't have the skills to be complemented by a machine. So I think what we have to be aware of is not responding sensibly to what the world presents to us. And I worry, well, you can worry yourself. I'm sorry I didn't spread myself.
We want to thank you very much for coming and sharing with us this morning. I want to remind you all that our next speaker that begins next week will be with us for 4 weeks. Kelly Maynard will be talking with us about tyrants and tunesmiths, 4 operas, and the times in which they were written. Before you leave, remember to turn on your cell phones and turn off your tea coils. If you have filled out your evaluation forms, please leave them on the table up front. Thank you all for coming.